That's where I think it's important that you know that you will be able to uh, fit into a framework the rest of the study of the Bible for the rest of your life. Automatically you'll think, well, what in the world? I read back here. I know where that fits. That fits back there in the patriarchal dispensation, and that gives me understanding because I realize what happened back there. Or this fits over here. He was talking to the Jews there. You talk of something that happened to David, that was under the Jewish or the Mosaic dispensation. Then you come over here into the New Testament and you see instructions to the churches. You say, well, that fits me because I'm over here. Here was God's people back here, and the whole world, all who received instruction from God under patriarchal dispensation. Understand now, people might say, well, what happened to these folks? Just a nation here. All people from the beginning received instruction from God, but a big part of them left God. People say, well, that's not fair to think that people over in Africa or people that's never even heard of the teachings of God should be condemned. That's not the way it is. They had the right way to start with. They left God, not God left them. That's the way it is in all situations. There is a way. That was the way then. Then there was a way here. You say, well, suppose some of these people back here never did even hear of this nation of people, but they kept the words that were given to them, passed down from father to son and so on. Well, we don't specifically see in the Bible words that says, now these folks continued on, but we don't see any reason why they didn't. God told what man to go preach to Nineveh? Was that a Jewish city? No, Nineveh was not a Jewish city, but it was in this period of time. God told Jonah, a Jew, to go and preach to Nineveh. So you say, well, how does that fit in? Well, there's a lot of speculation about it. Maybe there were some folks over there that had been doing God's word all down through these years. But regardless of who they were, those people who lived under the patriarchal dispensation or this dispensation, if they did God's commands, obedience is a key word through all the Bible. If you're praying that someone that you love or several people that you love, maybe you're converted and your mother and daddy's not. Maybe you're converted and your wife's not yet converted. Your prayer should be earnestly that she or he or they will obey God's commands, because that embraces the whole duty of man, is to obey God and keep his commandments. Of course, this is the whole duty of man. That means they'll do what's right over here. They will obey the gospel and live accordingly, or live according to the Bible from there on out. If these people did that under this dispensation and these people under this dispensation, then they were ready for the blood of Christ to save them in eternity, because they did what God had said do. This blood will save them. If we do what God tells us to do, that blood saves us. You tie it all together, and you see the total scheme of things. All right. Moses was the leader of God's people, bringing them out of this land of bondage down here in Africa. You see, the Bible talks about 3 continents, really. You say, why is he teaching geography? Well, if I tell you that you should go to Tallahassee tomorrow to such and such an event, and you say, well, I'm going to Highway 29. Why are you going that direction? Because it doesn't make any difference about geography. It does. You won't get to Tallahassee that way unless you turn somewhere and come back. You'll head for Birmingham and all points up in there. So you need to understand where we are and what we're talking about. This is Asia. The dividing line between Europe and Asia is right here. This is Byzantium at that time was the name that is now Istanbul. It was Constantinople But that's a dividing line between Asia and Europe. So in the New Testament, Paul went over into Europe, and Peter, Peter went around the Mediterranean area. We don't know whether he was positively ever over in Italy or not. The Bible doesn't say. But there was people that went over into Italy, which is part of Europe, Greece, and right up in here now is what's now Bosnia and all those places. But it also takes into account the continent of Africa, or this corner of it up in here. And you might realize that the Jewish system through proselytes and so on spread particularly down into Ethiopia. From Africa or Egypt right now, you move down through the Sudan, and from the Sudan down to Ethiopia. And there, in that area, is where the Nile River begins. I believe the Nile River is probably the second longest river on earth. The longest one being the Missouri, Mississippi. But down in this land of Ethiopia, there are millions of blacks who are black Jews, in effect. That was spread down through this area. It was the Ethiopian queen who came to Jerusalem at the time of Solomon and said, I'm going to go up there and see about this man. I've heard so much about him. And she went and she saw all the riches and the power and the glory that man had, and she said what? Most of you have heard this. She said, the half's not been told. She really saw something impressive. She was down here in Ethiopia, in Africa. So understand geography as you move along. As I've mentioned to you before, Abraham came from over here around where Iraq now is. Here's Ur, right here. Ur of Chaldees. He went up through here and down through here. All right. Now, the children of Israel was a name given to Jacob, were taken captive after being there as friends of the Pharaoh for so many years. Then they were enslaved and just held as slaves. And we use the term 400, although you'll find some differences in numbers there. But the Bible uses the term 400 anyway, 400 years. So they were down here 400 years, and God wanted his children released. Under all dispensations of time, again, let me emphasize something. The patriarchal dispensation, the Mosaical dispensation, and the Christian dispensation, God has always required some form of separatism. Separate. What does the word sanctify mean? Separate. You're separate out, and you are sanctified. You're separated out for a cause. God wanted his people to be separated from that which was evil and wrong unto a service that was greater, service to God. It was in this period of time, in this period of time, and it's still that way in the Christian dispensation. As members of the church, of this church, we say, well, we got to live in the world. Yes, we have. And we want to bring the church, as many of them as we can, to the world, but we are a separate people. All right, so these people couldn't worship down here in Egypt, right? God recognized that, and he said, Moses, you have him to let my people go. And he wouldn't let them go. So we've told you about the 10 plagues. The last one was what? The death of the firstborn. Now that meant cattle, horses, camels, people. The death of the firstborn. Every household. Let's say that a household had a boy and 2 girls and 4 camels and 6 cows. Well, they wake up the next morning or in the middle of the night. When the death angel comes over, the oldest boy dies, or the oldest one dies. The oldest cow dies, the oldest camel dies, and so on. They got death throughout. And that happened to the household of the Pharaoh. There again, I refer to a movie, the Ten Commandments. If I were to recommend, if there is such a word, for a movie, that probably is the closest to being worthwhile and gaining something from, so far as the Bible is concerned, of any movie I've ever looked at that's made by Hollywood. There are other movies that are made by religious groups that are real good, but they try specifically to hold to the Bible. And they don't sell many pictures either. They don't sell many tickets. But in this Ten Commandments, it covers some of these things fairly accurate. Wherever they want to add drama and so on, they play with the Word of God any way they want to. But Cecil B. DeMille in the early 50s respected the Bible. I've read and heard that they did months of research in the Bible and in Jewish history before they produced that particular movie. Of course, it's still in existence. It lasts about 3 hours. That showed the awfulness of these plagues, that particular movie did. It tried to depict, for instance, a hail and lightning, hail falling down and lightning just seemed to be dancing around the area. Well, you could wonder how much that caused those people to be afraid. Any of you folks who went through Aaron and after that Opal, you know the anxiety that we felt, and it wasn't anything compared to what these folks would have felt down there with those 10 plagues. Just having flies everywhere you move. Can you imagine an infestation of flies that's everywhere? It's bad enough to have these Florida cockroaches infesting around these parts. And it takes all sorts of pest control outfits to control them. But all those 10 things, in one way or the other, there were people in Egypt who respected them. In other words, these folks worshiped false gods. They'd put them up anything and worship it, just about it. They worshiped the Nile. And the first thing off the bat, there's that thing being turned to blood by God. And God had power over this type of thing that these people held allegiance to. All right, they left, and the Egyptians, after they had lost a firstborn in their households, said, let's get them out of here. In fact, the trinkets, maybe earbobs and nose rings and whatever they may have had in those days, bracelets and maybe things to go around your neck made of gold and trinkets and so on. Take them off, give them to them, give them something to pay them to get out of here. We don't want any more of our people killed. And they gave them all sorts of gold. Then later on we realized that a lot of that gold, they just took up some of it to build a golden calf over here at the at the foot of Mount Sinai. So they left with all their chickens and mules. I don't know if they had mules or not. Camels, whatever they had. They left and moving all this bunch of people, came over here to the Red Sea. Here's the Red Sea right here, and it gets down to probably a small neck of water in here, because within the last couple of 100 years, the Suez Canal has been built from here to the Mediterranean Sea. There they were stopped, and the Bible shows, and again that Ten Commandments movie shows, that there was some folks that is eternally or always griping. Look at here, Moses, what you've done. You've taken us out here, and we're going to all be killed. We can't get across that Red Sea, and the Egyptian army is coming after us. They'll mow us down. And that's what they would have done if they could have. But God held that army back. Do you remember how? By fire, wasn't it? He held that army back. And he told Moses to stretch forth the rod. Now, what rod would that have been? It's the plain old rod that you herd sheep with. The one that he used in the court of Pharaoh. You remember, he cast his rod down and it turned into a snake. Pharaoh said, "Get me some of my magicians," and so on, and I'll do the same thing. And he cast a couple of rods down and turned into snakes. His magicians did. But Moses' snake ate the others. So you might say God was not bested in those cases. Moses stretched forth the rod, and the waters parted. And a strong east wind blew and dried up the land in the bottom of that place. You might say, well, why is that detail put in there? Well, I guess they'd have mired up to their waist in mud in a lot of these places if it hadn't. But it blew, I believe the Bible says, all night, and dried up that river bottom. And then they went across on dry land with the waters being held back on both sides. But after that, then God removed the obstacle, the fire that was holding Pharaoh's army back. And they proceeded after the Israelites. They went down into the midst of where the sea was, and God caused the waters to come back. So you've got the song, Pharaoh's army got drowned, and so on. You've heard it so many times. So Pharaoh's army was drowned in that Red Sea. Now, that's a miraculous event. A miracle is defined as those things that cannot be explained through natural causes. The birth of a baby is not a miracle. That's a natural event. Some people will say, well, only a miracle to do this or do that. Then you realize, well, that's, you might call it a wonder or a good streak of luck, but most of these things we see, in fact, all I've ever seen can be explained naturally. But they went across on dry land, and on the other side, then they celebrated. Somebody sang a song of deliverance. Who was that? Miriam. So you see, this family is still leading this whole group of people. Aaron is the one that had spoken for Moses. Moses is the true leader. And Miriam, the sister, now sings a song of deliverance. It's found in the Bible there. We are now into Exodus. Exodus means going out. So these people were led out of that land of bondage. And that the word Exodus, as I said, means that. They started out and headed towards the promised land, but not exactly towards it. Somewhere along the line there, they sent into the promised land, or into the Jerusalem area, how many spies? How many tribes were there? Now these people were divided up into tribes, and those tribes were what? From the 12 sons of Jacob or Israel. Now I'll cover this right now while I'm thinking about it. I need to pull the map back out again, I guess. But later on, when they went into the promised land, these 12 tribes, and numbers give you the numbers of people in those 12 tribes. And later on, when they got into the promised land, they divided the land according to the tribes. But 2 of the tribes did not get land apportioned to them. What 2 tribes? Levi, because they were what? Priestly tribe, and the others were supposed to support them. We support the preacher and the preacher's wife because he does a service, and that's what the Levites in this old system were doing. All right, Levi, so they had certain rights to live in certain areas and so on. So don't misunderstand that. But all these people were to give to this system, this theocracy, in essence, religion mixed with civil government. And they were to support that tribe of people. Now the other tribe was Joseph. The favorite son, Joseph. His name does not appear on parcels of land here. But he wasn't left out. What happened? Anybody? He had two sons, and their names appear on this. They got land. So he got double honor, if you please, so far as the land was concerned. Now, what was his two sons' names? Ephraim, right here, and Manasseh. There's two. They call them half tribes. Half of them are over here, and half of them over here. Manasseh and Manasseh. Now, the other 10 sons on there were the brothers of Joseph and Levi. But all but 2 had land named after them, and that was Joseph and Levi. And we tried to sit down and put all these together the other day in class. And see, there's Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, Issachar, and Gad, and Reuben. Reuben's the oldest. Judah, that's the one that Christ's lineage comes down through. Simeon, and Benjamin, that's the other son of Rachel. And let's see, did I name enough of them yet? Dan somewhere in here. Over here. Down right here. Yeah. So you come up with 10 areas of land named from 10 of the brothers, but not Joseph and Levi, and that's a test question. Can't beat that. All right. They sent 12 spies into this land. I need to get the map back. And those spies came back, and they had 2 different reports. 10 of those spies said what? Just in your own words. Yeah, that land, there's giants over there. And according to the Bible, there was. And later on, we see that David fought Goliath. He was a giant. So there's giants up in here. Well, we're like grasshoppers compared to those folks. They'll kill us all. But said one thing about it, there's plenty of grapes, and there's plenty of food supplies and so on. It's a fine place. We're scared. We can't take it. 2 of the spies brought back good report. And what was their report? Okay. Essentially the same thing. That's a land flowing with milk and honey. But with God's help, we can do it. Their names were... Somebody want to holler them out? Caleb. Now, an interesting fact here. Because these were such a fussing, grumbling, just a crabby bunch of people, God had done everything for them, yet they didn't appreciate it. So this 40 years, in one way of looking at it, became a 40-year purge. When we first came to Pensacola in 1953, people were saying, well, it's a small town, relatively speaking. All we need is about 100 deaths in this area to get things moving. Well, they were talking about an old establishment downtown. Well, look what God did. You bunch of stiff-necked, hard-headed people, you won't do what I told you to do, and you fuss and grumble all the time. So not a one of you over 20 years old that crossed that Red Sea will go into the promised land. Not a one of you, except, we know there's 2 that did. Joshua and Caleb. Only 2. Not even Moses went into the promised land. Why didn't Moses go into the promised land? Where do you find that? This is a test question. Numbers 20. Numbers 20. You find it in Numbers 20. Now, God had made a great leader of Moses. And you say, well, Moses did something that's wrong. He disobeyed God. God said, you speak to the rock and water will come forth to feed my people, or to give my people drink. And he got angry with the people because they were fussing and fuming and griping about him. And he said something about, you can find it there. You bunch of hard-headed folks, did I have to bring forth water again? He struck the rock. You can imagine he got mad. You might say what we'd call mad. But God calls him, and the Bible calls him a meek person. So a meek person does not mean that he don't lose his temper maybe every now and then, because Moses did. Moses, have you got it there? Read it.
And Moses lifted up his hand and with his rod smote the rock twice, and the water came out and smoke. Except when he wanted.
I want you to show me why Moses did such a thing. Back up a little bit and read a little bit more. Brother Liddell, would you look up another passage in connection with this? Look up 1 Corinthians 10:3. And Brother Dobbs, look up Psalms 106, 32 and 33. All right, have you got back far enough there to see what there was? Well, let me read, if you don't mind. There was no water for the congregation. That's that group of people out there in the wilderness. They assembled themselves together against Moses and Aaron. See, people are fussing. They're against Moses and Aaron. And the people strove with Moses. In other words, they're griping, fussing, and spake, saying, would that we had died with our brethren when our brethren died before Jehovah. And why have ye brought the assembly of Jehovah into the wilderness, that we should die here, we and our beasts? We ought to have died years ago. You're just messing up, Moses.